Hello everyone, I'm Taaka and founder and CEO of Busara Africa, a Pan-African leadership development firm. Welcome to the Leadership in Africa Redefined podcast. This podcast seeks to do two things. One, change the narrative of leadership in Africa, and two, provide concrete strategies and tips for leading in an African context. We do this by interviewing amazing African leaders so that the narrative of leadership in Africa is defined by the best of us, not the worst of us. We share their stories and provide practical suggestions for dealing with the challenges of leading on this continent. We discuss, interrogate, and examine concrete leadership practices that work. We also look at failures that these leaders faced and how they navigated their ways back on track. It's an exciting and empowering space for leaders to thrive and engage. Subscribe to the show to become the leader you have always wanted to be. And if you like the show, be sure you rate it and review it. It helps others to find it. Thanks so much.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Leadership in Africa Redefined, the podcast. And this is one of our nuts and bolts sessions. For those of you who have listened to our nuts and bolts episodes, you know we bring out practical tools and strategies to address everyday leadership challenges or questions. And I don't do these sessions by myself. I do them with none than Robert, our technical leader, Busara Africa. And Robert, big shout out to you. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Taaka?
I'm good. You know, last time in our last nuts and bolts session, we were talking about leading in economic turmoil, the do's and don'ts. And I remember something I think that you said, Robert, that really stayed with me is that during these tough economic times, we're so focused on taking care of our teams, we often don't talk about how we need to take care of ourselves. So, you know, the perennial thing about put on your own oxygen mask first before you help another. So that really stayed with me. So today, what are we focusing on? Today, we're providing some nuts and bolts about effective delegation. How to ensure you get the best out of delegation and not feel disappointed when you decide to delegate. So Robert, how has delegation been for you?
Taka, I had my own fair share of pitfalls with delegation, you know, in my attempt to try this delegation thing, you know. And one of the instances where I used to work with an organization, and I was so busy at the beginning of my work when I started with them. And so I decided, you know what, there was this very important conversation around very important issue that was happening in the country. And I said, you know what, I'm busy with this internal matters. Why I sent one of my colleagues who was covering the role that I was supposed to speak about, with the understanding that this person knows, you know, what we are supposed to be doing in this area. And we go and go and make a big promise that sparks international outcry. And everybody's disaster, Robert, but why did this person say this? And it was in the newspapers, it was on TV, this was being said. And so it was like a small delegation pitfall that was like, you know, I delegated and the person didn't get the work. No, it was a job threatening delegation thing. So for me, I think it has been a big thing for me within that space of delegating. So yeah.
And you know, I am sure, and that sounds like a tough one. Send somebody out to do something and they just make a mess. I'm sure many of our listeners can relate to you and have had their fair share of difficulties with delegation. And hopefully this episode, this nuts and bolts episode, should leave you with some concrete tools, some do's and don'ts to ensure that delegation, which should be an essential part of your leadership style, is something that is as painless, but it's also rewarding and effective. But Robert, maybe it's important to actually start out by saying that what I have found is that many times people think they're delegating, but actually what they're doing is only supervising or apportioning roles and responsibilities.
Oh, really?
Yes, so
Tell
people
me
have
more.
it's like people are busy ensuring that others are doing their jobs, giving them roles in an activity. So in other words, somebody has a JD and you're making sure, have you done this? Have you done this? And they call that delegation. But that's not really delegation.
Okay, now I'm interested, So, what is this delegation thing and why do we sometimes get it wrong? Because I'll sound
And I wanted to start by clarifying that. So to clarify the distinction between asking somebody to do something that's very much within their job description, their annual objectives. So you're just asking them as part of what they're supposed to do, compared to delegation, which we are defining as when you as the leader give another member of your team the responsibility and authority to complete an assigned task. And that is something, that task that you have given them is something that is within your plate. It's your responsibility, your authority, it's within your JD. You should have done that, but instead you're delegating for someone else to do that. And I think those keywords, responsibility and authority, and tasks to be undertaken, I think those later we'll come back to those because those become particularly important. So again, the distinction between asking somebody to do something that's just allocating the tasks versus delegation, which is taking something that's on your plate and giving it to another to do.
I know we attempted talking about this with the introduction of the story that I talked about, but why is it so difficult for some of us to delegate? What are some of the things that makes it difficult for people to say, now I want to give what is on my plate to someone to do so that I can get feedback on? Yeah.
Well, certainly some of that, and a lot of what we've heard, we've been together many of these trainings, we've co-facilitated many of these trainings. We have sessions on delegation, and these are the things we're hearing, isn't it, Robert? One is some folks may simply be worried that when they take something and give it to somebody else, the other person may look better and it may diminish their authority. Tends to happen when sometimes the leader, you're feeling a bit insecure. Others have genuine concerns about delegation because they've gone through the kind of experience you went through, Robert. You've given things to somebody else and it was such a mess that you're like, this is very risky. I may give this to somebody else and they're going to make a huge mess and the implications might be huge for the organization or potentially even for you and your job. Another thing I've seen, and this tends to happen, and this is quite gendered and relates to age, is where some folks almost don't want to seem too bossy. They don't want to seem as if I'm giving so-and-so something to do that should be on my plate. People will be like, but you're being paid to do this thing. Why aren't you doing it? So they don't want that kind of almost response, so they avoid it. Others, and this is one of the most common reasons why I hear people say, I just can't deal with delegation, it's too stressful, is that it takes too much time. They realize they can just do it themselves much better. Others feel like, if I give it, I will lose control. Or bottom line, others realize no matter what, I can do it better. And this thing needs to be done well. So why should I give it to Robert to do? Why should I give it to Mary to do when it'll be at substandard level? And yet what needs to go out has to be at the top level. So those are some of the reasons I've heard people not delegating or why they find it difficult to delegate.
So I think sometimes we may need to even go a little deeper into some of these things that they're really ones,
Yeah.
That, for instance, in our context, it's as leaders, it's sometimes difficult to, you take something, you give it to someone, and you have a deadline and you are dependent on this thing. You go and this person keeps giving you excuses. And at that time, maybe as a leader, as you said, it's on my plate. So then that means the responsibility is mine. How do we go? How, Miguel? How do we ensure that when we are giving these things out, we are clear that people will be able to deliver? Because sometimes I don't want to look bad in front of my bosses because I gave something to a colleague to do and they couldn't deliver.
Yeah, and this is the reality. Yeah, you're spot on, Robert. This is the reality. I've had this as well. We've all been in situations where, yes, indeed, you give something to someone to do. The result, like a report, let's get concrete. You give somebody a report to write, something that has to go to your board or your line manager or something, your personal time, and you're like, look, can you write up this report? And what comes back is so bad, you have to redo it. And you're like, that's the last time I gave that out. And so people end up avoiding it. So how can you ensure that you don't decide, I'm never giving it out again? What do you do differently? Yeah? And often I find the common mistakes people make, Robert, when they're delegating, is they almost over-delegate. Huh? They give too much without setting up the other person to succeed. And I often say, let's just take the example of having a report done. If you're going to delegate a report that needs to go to the board, that needs to go to somebody senior, before you give it all out to someone, first give them bits and pieces to build up their capacity to do it. So maybe tell them, work on the outline and then the intro. Next time, they do a little bit more. So in other words, whenever you're delegating, ensure the person has the capacity to do that job effectively. Whether that means, as I explained, breaking it up into pieces, whether it means coaching them along the way, whether it means really clarifying the expectations around it. So for instance, that example you gave, Robert, about the person who went to a meeting to represent you. In that one, what would you have done differently?
I mean, learning from now, I think a little more coaching and taking time with the person to explain what is expected. So both of us agree on what is expected in their delivery, especially because it is my job. I need to make sure that the person understands from my perspective what is expected, so that we don't have a different perspective from the person doing delivery as against me who is supposed to do it. We all agree. Sometimes we even say, let's repeat it together. Make sure we are all on the same page.
Exactly. And I've seen this so often when people are representing, they've been delegated. The executive director, CEO is supposed to show up at a meeting. They can't make it, to the delegated to somebody, yeah? And they don't prepare the person adequately. So you're so right. It's about saying, all right, I want you to represent the organization at this meeting. I should have been there. This is what you can expect. You may get questions on this and this. You may be expected to speak to this and this issue from a company or organizational perspective. These are our, it's all about setting people up for success. Right? So that's what I would say for those, to avoid the disappointment that comes with delegation. Provide capacity to do the job.
Taaka, this takes too much time.
Yes, I know.
Now do one by one. Then I'll do it myself.
Yes, sir.
What would you say about that? That people rather thinking, well, I mean, if I have to now sit down and make you understand, and now we have to go through A, B, C, D, why don't I just do it and kill the time so that we don't do? What do you say to that as well?
And thank you for that, because that is a common reason. I hear from many reasons. They're like, please stop with this, your delegation thing. I'm under pressure to deliver so many results. If I have to keep, almost coaching and explaining things, I will never get my work done. Huh? What I often say is, too often we think about delegation as something to make our work go faster in the short term, and something to help us accomplish more. I would say the number one reason to delegate is not to increase your productivity. It's to build the capacity of those that you lead. When that becomes your objective, to build the capacity, then you're not always thinking speed. It means you recognize that you are very thoughtful and intentional about what you delegate. You are thinking, all right, what's urgent? If certain things are urgent, and you can't afford to be spending time coaching someone, then by all means, that might not be the thing to delegate. But if you have a little bit more room and time around something else that you think it would be so useful to build the capacity or Joe, Sheila, or Kwame around that thing, then by all means, use that particular task to build their capacity. So I think that and then also I always say to folks, delegation as a way of building capacity is slow in the beginning and very fast in the end. So it's one of those things where you're front loading the work, but trust me, when you make the time and invest in building the capacity, you start to find that actually you're able to take a lot more off your plate in the long term because you build the capacity of those around you to actually take that.
Hi folks, hope you're enjoying the show. So have you heard about the Africa Leaders Circle? Our impactful e-learning platform that enables you to grow into the leader you would want to follow? Here is a message to tell you what you need to know.
Are you a CEO, executive director, or HR manager that is looking to build a pipeline of leaders that are ready to step up into management roles? Are you looking for a self-paced learning platform that provides your leaders with quality content and does not take them away from their work for too long? Are you looking for a program that enables your managers to move from knowledge acquisition to demonstrable improved practice? Then look no further. Sign them up for the African Leaders Circle today. The African Leaders Circle is an e-learning platform that gives your managers access to an exclusive community of leaders across the continent and a wide range of strategies and tools to stand out. We do this through online courses, discussion forums, a library of resources, and a personal learning advisor to support each of your managers to maximize their learning on the platform. To learn more, visit our website www.busara-africa.com.
Don't forget to visit our website busara-africa.com to learn more. And now back to the show.
So I really agree with you, Taaka, around this issue of building capacity, because I have had that experience where I've built capacity and I've had the best out of them. You know, when you start building capacity and have people around you that you can trust, after a while, even things you don't tell them, they deliver for you. By the time you pick up a phone and say, I need a report for the board, somebody say, oh, I know you asked me, so I've done it, you know. So then it's just about reviewing it and submitting it. They know your deadlines. People come to know. And I think it's also about building relationships, you know. I mean, if you build quality relationship with the people around you, they get to know you, they get to understand you, they get to be your support. So it becomes a little more easier to do work with them and with regards to getting them to get the delegation right, you know. I think that is a key thing. There's another question, which is a little more political, you know, where we talk about, I am the head of the organization, and I said this colleague who has understood me, has working with me, and is doing great. And whenever they go, my feedback from my bosses and my colleagues are, hey, this guy is doing well. Oh, he's good. He's really doing very well. Oh, that's great. Now I'm thinking, is this person taking my job? Am I going to be kicked out? Is this person going to be my boss the next 6 months? How do I deal with this one as well, Taaka, with issues of delegation?
I like that because, you know, we're naming the realities that folks are facing and they're feeling. You know, we often say that you can't lead another until you lead yourself. And the leading yourself here, the thing that you're managing in this context, this challenge you just described, is very natural insecurity. It's understandable. All of a sudden, you've sent this junior person, they're shining, and then you're almost like, what about, you know, does that mean I'm, you know, do they take, all of that comes up. So I would say step one is managing yourself and those insecurities. And it's recognizing that your value as a leader is not determined by how much you individually achieve. Your value as a leader is determined how you influence and build and empower others collectively to achieve. So when you manage your ego, you start to realize it's not just about you, but it's how you allow others to shine. And so that helps you mitigate the fear that when people see your direct report at the meeting shining, they shouldn't be seeing it as like, oh, so Taaka is incompetent, but rather Taaka has done so well. She gives space, support, coaching room for people to shine so much that this person is here. Now, if that means that a lot more is taken off your plate as they shine and do that, then it gives you room to look for other strategic roles, other things that you can be doing. So it's really about doing the inner work so that you don't see this as a threat, but actually see this as a resource to shine.
Wow, this is really an interesting part, and I like the idea and the fact that the thinking around what you're doing is very important, around knowing that this is not about kicking me out. This is about rather building capacity and making me rather look good, which is helping people to be the best. And I just want to add a little bit around thinking about, as a leader, you're always looking at the next step for yourself as well. So if you're thinking about, okay, I'm grooming people not because I want them to look good and I will look bad, but the idea is that I'm thinking, okay, if I am here, when I'm moving to the next step, who is ready to step in? You know, I always tell people that immediately I get into a job, I start preparing my exit strategy. And one of the exit strategies is to prepare someone to step in. You know, so if we have that mindset, it's very, very difficult to ever think that somebody will take your job because you are getting ready to go. So then what is the big deal?
I love that, Robert. And I think increasingly as leaders, we should measure ourselves that way. Not by, what have I done? But how many? So in fact, they often say, I've heard it say, I can't remember who said it, but the true measure of a leader is, and probably John Maxwell, the true measure of a leader is not how many followers they have. The true measure of a leader is how many leaders they have developed. So that's the shift. And delegation is one of those tools that helps you develop people who can, you're right, step into your shoes as you start to move on and forward. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Taaka. And I think that even as we say this, one of the key things that will come to the mind of our listeners will be, so what should I avoid? And what should I look out not to do when I'm delegating so that I don't get into these pitfalls and these
So we already mentioned one of those, which is over-delegating, giving more than the person can handle. I would say delegation is not an event, it's a process. So it's about really understanding, okay, if I'm working with Robert and I want to develop his capacity, what are the kinds of things that would be fantastic to delegate to him? Having a conversation with him about that as well, to say, Robert, I realize it would be as part of your career growth. It would be fantastic if you have more exposure to these kinds of stakeholders. So you will notice that I'm going to be asking you more and more to represent me at these types of meetings. And then before the meeting, do as we talked about before, prepare you to shine at that meeting. When you come back, we debrief. So you see how that is a very thoughtful, intentional process of having you step in to my shoes in a way that you succeed and perform. Same thing if I was giving you a report. Only give you the amount you can do to your capacity, yeah? So that means, I think, to avoid including the over-delegation is what I see people doing. They delegate by sight. So you're in the office, and then you see somebody walking and you're thinking, you've just gotten this email that says XYZ needs to be done and it needs to be done yesterday. You look up and you're like, who is here? You might be doing hybrid working. So some people are there, some people are not. Or somebody just happens to walk by your site. You're like, hey, my friend, please come here. And then all of a sudden, because you saw them, they were the first one that came to mind, that's the one you delegate to. So I think that's something to avoid. I think something to also avoid, I've seen happen, and this is what's so common, is you delegate only to the high performance because they're the safe pair of hands. And we understand why it's easy to do that because, you don't want the thing to be messed up. So instead of delegating only to the high performers, we're saying build the capacity of I'm not saying give it to them so they drop, but those who struggle a bit, build up capacity. Otherwise, the two dangers find your high performance are over. She always goes to Robert. So why does it matter? Why I don't matter? I'm not as important as Robert. So I would say that would be also something to avoid. And the final thing I would say, Robert, to avoid is delegating. This is the boring admin stuff that I'm supposed to do. And that's what they delegate, all the unexciting stuff. And remember, if you keep in mind the delegation is about building up the capacity of others, not just getting things off your desk, then you're not just delegating all the boring stuff. So those are some of the things to avoid.
Thank you so much, Taaka. And I'm just being a person listening to you on the other side and listening to Robert on the other side. I'm thinking, this thing, the way they are saying it looks so easy to say, but doing it, it's not easy. Because I have all the deadlines, I have all the big tasks to do. How am I going to delegate this thing? So, I mean, people may think it just is too difficult. What do you say, Taaka, to this?
Well, then they would also say leadership is too difficult. What I always say is delegation. I fully appreciate and accept that delegation isn't always easy. But I recognize, as I've heard others say, that leadership is fundamentally a contact sport. And it is a sport in which the best players are not just those who use others to score goals, but they build and coach others to become the best players they can be. And delegation ultimately is a wonderful way to do that. So I would continue to encourage you. It's not easy, but it certainly gets better as you go along and practice.
Thank you so much, Taaka. And I think we've enjoyed ourselves. And
yes, indeed. Wonderful. So, folks, that's it from us, from another one of the Nuts and Bolts sessions. Thank you for joining us. See you again. And if you liked the show, don't forget to subscribe and share with others who you think will need and value this information. Thanks for joining us. Ciao.
Hello, wonderful leader. Thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. I hope you learned a lot. I did. If you want more of the lessons, experiences, and nuggets for effective leadership, join our amazing platform for leaders, the African Leaders Circle. Learn more at www.busara-africa.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe and share with other great leaders. See you soon. Ciao.